This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 92 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the pros and cons, but really mostly the cons, of teaching with Frickin Packets. I saw a video a few months ago that I haven't been able to get out of my head. In the video, a high school student named Jeff Bliss stood up in the middle of class and basically expressed his frustration to the teacher in the room. In a few minutes, I'm going to play the sound from the video, and then I'll talk about why I think it's so important, why there's a message in it I think we all need to reflect on a bit. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Screencast-O-Matic. Screencast-O-Matic is an easy-to-use screen recorder tool that makes flipped and blended learning super simple for teachers. You can record your lessons, directions for student assignments, video announcements, and anything else you need to screencast for using either your Chromebook, PC, or Mac. Screencast-O-Matic hosts your videos and allows you to edit them, so everything you need for video production is all in one tool. Cult of Pedagogy listeners can get 50% off your first year of a Screencast-O-Matic Pro subscription. Just go to screencast-o-matic.com/pedagogy50. That's screencast-o-matic.com/pedagogy50. I also want to thank you for the reviews you've left for this podcast on iTunes. These reviews really help draw more people in and get them listening. And I really love reading them and learning a little bit about who you are. If you've been enjoying the podcast and you think other people should listen too, take a few minutes today to go over to iTunes and leave a review. Thanks so much. So let's start with the video. I'll have it up on my site if you want to watch, but since you're probably in your car or on a treadmill right now, let's just listen. This is high school student Jeff Bliss being recorded on a classmate's phone as he talks to his teacher. At the beginning of the video, he's talking from the back of the class, but as the video progresses, he stands up from his desk, walks to the front of the room, says his final words, then exits. Here we go.
Freaking lady, go off on kids, because they don't freaking get this crap. If you would just get up and teach them instead of handing them a freaking packet, yo. There's kids in here who don't learn like that. They need to learn face to face. You're just getting mad because I'm pointing out the obvious and you're
wasting my time.
No, I'm not wasting your time. I'm telling you what you need to do.
Get out.
You want kids to come into your class? You want them to get excited for this? You got to come in here. You got to make them excited. You want a kid to change and start doing better? You got to touch his freaking heart. Can't expect a kid to change if all you do is just tell him. You gotta take this job serious. This is the future of this nation. And when you come in here, like you did last time, and make a statement about, oh, this is my paycheck, indeed it is. But this is my country's future and my education.
I respect that. Can you go outside, please?
Score big.
But there's a limit. When I'm not bitching, but simply making an observation.
Okay.
And now I will leave. You're welcome.
Good, bye.
And if you would like, I'll teach you a little more so you can actually learn how to teach a freaking class. Because since I got here, I've done nothing but read packets. So don't try and take credibility for teaching me jack.
Just go, bye.
Okay, let's get something out of the way. Yes, the student was disrupting class and his behavior is disrespectful. I will acknowledge that. On the other hand, we don't know exactly what happened before the camera was turned on. Based on what he says in the video, my guess is that Bliss had just voiced some kind of concern. The teacher told him to quit complaining, and at that point, I guess he'd had enough. What I have gleaned about Jeff Bliss from the internet is that at the time of the video, he was an 18-year-old sophomore. So apparently, at some point, he had not been successful in school. For some people, this takes away his credibility. But for me, it makes him an even better source of information about why school isn't working for some students. Disruptive behavior aside, the content of Bliss's outburst tells me that his teacher's primary mode of instruction is through packets. This was what got me. This is what made me watch this video 6, 7, 8 times over. Because I just believe him. I believe him because I've seen it. I've seen classrooms where teachers deliver instruction overwhelmingly through worksheets or packets of worksheets. I've seen my own kids' schoolwork come home, and I've asked friends, other parents with school-age kids, and colleagues who consult in lots of schools, and nearly all of them tell me that a lot of our students' instructional time is being spent hunched over some kind of worksheet. That is a problem. I want to spend some time looking at this problem from all sides. What distinguishes a busy work worksheet from something that delivers real value? Why teaching with worksheets is usually not the best choice for learning, the reasons teachers default to worksheet teaching, and what other learning experiences would be better for our students. So let's start by agreeing on some terms. First, we need to define what we mean by a worksheet. Technically, a worksheet is anything printed on copier paper and given to students to write on. And since you can print just about anything on a piece of paper, we really can't say that worksheets per se are good or bad. That would be like saying books or movies are good or bad. It's a medium, a delivery system. And there are plenty of instructionally rich things you can do with a worksheet. A graphic organizer is a wonderful tool for research, pre-writing, and note-taking. An excerpt from a primary source can be printed on a worksheet for close study and annotation. Worksheets can be used for analyzing data, and I've got a link on my site to this great collection from a teacher named Maria Anderson, where she's collected data from really current sources for students to analyze. Worksheets can be used as scaffolds for note-taking, as tools for reflection. They can be used as formative assessments. They can be used as recording tools alongside more active experiences, like data sheets for labs or planning sheets for group projects, and so on. So in my experience, when people criticize worksheets, they are referring to a specific type of worksheet, what I will call a busy sheet, the kind where students are either doing work that's fairly low-level recall stuff, like filling in blanks with words or choosing from multiple choice questions or labeling things, or work that has no educational value at all, like word searches or word scrambles, or coloring stuff in cases where coloring adds no extra layer of understanding. Sometimes the difference between a busy sheet and a quality learning tool is obvious, and other times it's a judgment call. After talking to lots of educators about how they use worksheets in their classrooms, I think it's most accurate to say that every worksheet falls somewhere on a continuum. Some worksheets are clearly nothing but busy sheets, while others, like note-taking sheets or data collection tools, directly support learning. I'll call these power sheets. I don't love that name, but I couldn't think of anything else. I think a lot of worksheets fall somewhere between the two. Because there's such a range, the only person who can really make the call is you. One more term, packets, just to be clear, are simply a bunch of worksheets stapled together. They could contain a lot of power sheets, but when a student refers to them as frickin' packets, it's highly likely that they are mostly made up of busy sheets. Now, one other thing I want to talk about when we're defining this is a group that I'm calling possible busy sheets in disguise. Some formats have come along recently that have the potential to deliver the same kind of work we find in busy sheets, only they don't always look like it. While each of these certainly could offer instructional value, they could also be just another way to keep kids still, and there's 3 of them. So these are just something to be aware of. If you sort of are telling yourself, well, I'm fine, I don't do these things. I don't really do worksheets. You may actually be doing them in another form. So the first one is computer programs or apps that have students performing basically the same activities that we see on busy sheets. Another one is the interactive notebook. Now these vary widely in quality. Some offer true interactivity, and others just offer the same value of a worksheet, except maybe they're colored, cut, and pasted into a notebook. The third format that could actually be a busy sheet in disguise is the hyperdoc. And I've interviewed people about hyperdocs, and I've really sung their praises. But you also need to be careful about these. If they are thoughtfully designed, they have the potential to offer wonderful variety, exploration, differentiation, but they could also be just a new way to organize busy work. So we've sort of defined the problem here that what we're talking about are not necessarily all worksheets, but worksheets that would sort of qualify as busy sheets, that their main educational value is to keep kids busy. So next I want to talk about the problem with busy sheet teaching. Busy sheet teaching, that's a mouthful. Busy sheet teaching is when we use busy sheets in place of other better forms of instruction. This type of teaching might take the form of bell ringers, homework, early finisher work, classroom centers, or even the main learning activity during regular class time. Now, all those things I just listed are not necessarily problems. It's when we use busy worksheets to fill those times and to fill those activities. So, what is wrong with busy sheet teaching? I've got a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it is disconnected from anything meaningful. Busy sheets isolate skills so much that students have trouble connecting them to real life. When a student sees little value in an activity, he is not truly engaged. So I have an example that is up on the website of a reading worksheet. This one has a short passage about Maya Angelou, and then students are answering 4 fill-in-the-blank questions about the passage. And the answers are scrambled at the end of the questions. So all they have to do is unscramble the words, and then they've got the answer to their question. This type of busy sheet would most likely be used to teach reading comprehension or to serve as a Black History Month activity. So I'd like to unpack these 2 rationales for using this type of sheet one at a time. Let's start with the reading comprehension reason and why that's a problem. Having students answer low-level recall questions about a passage of writing that offers no meaningful context doesn't do a lot to make them better readers. If the questions were more challenging, if they ask students to choose which textual evidence supports some particular idea, for example, that might move it up the continuum a bit toward the power end. But is this the best way to give students reading practice? If students do this kind of work day after day with passages instead of real books, they won't be reading enough. So much of what we call reading instruction is far inferior to having students read real books. This was the subject of my interview with Pernille Ripp in episode 84. If you're still using a lot of this type of worksheet to teach reading, please take some time to listen to what she does instead, because she's got a great system and her kids read a ton. So back to this Maya Angelou handout. The other reason that you might see this would be to teach some sort of social studies or to celebrate Black History Month. Giving students a packet of these types of busy sheets where the work and contributions of significant African Americans are reduced to one-page blurbs followed by some cute activity is inadequate in so many ways. And I see a lot of this, and this would really be a whole other podcast and blog post, but I am linking to an article from Teaching Tolerance that gives much more sort of comprehensive and authentic ways to honor Black history in your classroom all year round, rather than limiting it to, a collection of worksheets that you do in February. So that's the first reason. That's the first reason why busy sheet teaching is a problem, is that it's just really disconnected from anything meaningful. The second reason is that it often misses the standards. Even if these worksheets are labeled as addressing certain standards, the kind of work we see on busy sheets often misses the mark. Now, for this example, I want to use a typical grammar worksheet. On this worksheet, there are 10 sentences, and students have to draw 2 lines under each verb or verb phrase. And then on the blank beside the sentence, they have to write whether that verb is present, past, future, present progressive, past present perfect, or past perfect. I'm dying of boredom saying that. This type of worksheet, where students are asked to label or identify various grammatical constructions, has thrived for decades. And in the days before worksheets, it existed in the form of exercises from grammar books. Now, apart from the well-established fact that teaching grammar outside the context of meaningful writing does nothing to help students become better writers, and in many cases makes them worse, and I'm linking you to research on that over on my website, the skills being practiced in this kind of worksheet don't actually teach or reinforce the goals set by our academic standards. Here's what I mean. For convenience, I will use the Common Core standards. Even though I know a lot of states now have shifted from them, my understanding is that they haven't made a lot of significant changes either. So we'll just use those as a reference. There is no mention anywhere in the Common Core Language Arts standards of students being able to identify or label these verb tenses. Nothing. Certainly not the higher level ones, the present perfect and those. It does, however, require students to use them correctly in their writing. So it would make a lot more sense to show students these different constructions and then have them find places in their writing where they are using them. If they aren't using them anywhere, have them try it. They never, ever have to actually know the names of the verb tenses or a whole lot of other grammatical constructions. They just have to be using them correctly in their writing. Now, despite this, tens of thousands of students are required to complete busy sheets like this every day. And I bet they get tested on the same kind of information too. Meanwhile, little to no time is being spent giving them opportunities to use these constructions in their real writing. Sometimes I just have to vent about grammar instruction. So I am going to just tell you really quickly where you can find more on that. If this is the first time you're hearing about this, I am going to just go quickly to my list of podcasts, and I'm going to tell you which podcast to listen to where we talk about nothing but grammar. It is episode 74, How to Deal with Student Grammar Errors, and I get into all the nitty-gritty about the research on why out-of-context grammar instruction does not work. Okay. Another problem with busy sheet teaching is that it often has no instructional value. By definition, a busy sheet's goal is to keep students busy, not necessarily teach them anything. The most egregious type of busy sheets are word searches, word scrambles, and crossword puzzles, which might as well be a list of definitions with blanks next to them. I have watched my own children do word searches for homework and stress out massively about not finding every single word because they would lose points. If there is any pedagogical justification for that, I certainly have not found it. End of the word search diatribe. Another problem with busy sheet teaching is that it requires lots and lots of sitting still. The more teachers use busy sheets, the more students will sit and sit and sit. Yes, it's possible that there are teachers who use a lot of busy sheets but have great alternative seating options in their classrooms. But my guess is that in most of the classrooms where busy sheets are abundant, students are basically sitting in desks. This is far from ideal. In 2014, teacher Alexis Wiggins spent 2 days shadowing her students and was shocked to discover just how much time they spent sitting and how exhausting that was. And we hear all the time about the studies that are confirming how dangerous it can be to sit for extended periods of time, how bad that is for your health. So planning for extended periods of sitting all day long just isn't good for our kids. Another problem with busy sheet teaching is that it requires a ton of copying. Anyone who has ever had to wait in line for a copy machine or found themselves staring desperately at a cryptic error message on the copier knows that relying heavily on worksheets wastes a lot of time and paper. And the last problem with busy sheet teaching is that it gives you more stuff to grade. Many teachers who use a lot of worksheets also grade them, calculating those points as part of a student's overall grade in a course. This approach creates two problems. Number one, it erases the value of formative assessment. If worksheets are meant to be used to teach students something or give them practice on skills they're learning, then why would students be penalized for making mistakes on them? I can see why teachers might give points for completion, but going through and marking wrong answers and then taking off points for something students are still in the process of learning is really missing the point. That's what summative assessments are supposed to be for. The other problem is that this system creates a ridiculous amount of grading for the teacher. If you're going home with piles and piles of paper to grade, you're assigning too many things to be graded. If you can shift some of these activities from graded to calling them practice, you'll be giving students the practice they need without creating a lot of extra paperwork for yourself. And on the post, if you go to Cult of Pedagogy, click podcast, and then click on episode 92, I've got a link to an 8-minute Facebook Live video where I actually talk a little bit more about this shift and about how teachers can shift some graded things and start to change your culture in your classroom where you call these things practice instead of, assignments for a grade, and how you actually manage that. So if that concept is intriguing to you, then come on over to the post and take a look at that. So those are some of the reasons that busy work or busy sheet teaching is a problem. The next thing we're going to get to is a little bit of a dissection of why we do it, why we rely on worksheets and busy sheets, and what we can do instead. Before we do, I'm going to take a quick break to thank our other sponsor, Microsoft Hacking STEM. To engage the leaders of tomorrow, we need to give our students hands-on practice with science, technology, engineering, and math, experiences that reflect the academic standards and bring real-world scenarios into the classroom. Microsoft's Hacking STEM is a resource devoted to helping teachers enhance and democratize their current STEM curriculum through inquiry and project-based lesson plans aligned to middle school standards. Using computational and design thinking, students build affordable scientific instruments that visualize real-time data in Microsoft Excel. All these resources are absolutely free and can be accessed by going to cultofpedagogy.com/hackingstem. That's all one word, hackingstem. cultofpedagogy.com/hackingstem. Okay, so why do we teach with busy sheets, and what can we do instead? Teachers have a lot of reasons for leaning heavily on busy sheets, and some of these may seem unavoidable. So let's look at some of the most common reasons, along with some ideas for what we can do instead. Number one is no textbooks, no tech. If your school is short on materials and technology, it may be necessary to use printables to build your curriculum. Much of what we learn comes from reading things, so if you don't have good science textbooks, for example, worksheets and handouts can serve the same purpose. What's important is that we do this thoughtfully. So here are some things to think about if you're building a curriculum out of worksheets. Even if you download a whole unit or curriculum, only use the parts that are going to provide value to your students rather than just marching students through the whole thing. And now, I know that sounds obvious, but it is something to think about. Sometimes it's tempting to just use everything and just have students do the whole thing. And so you can sort of thoughtfully cull this stuff and make it so that it's only the high value stuff. Another thing to think about when you're putting together a curriculum out of worksheets is to beware of cute. Some materials are so beautifully designed, they may make it hard to notice if they're thin on quality learning. If you can get both at once, awesome, but always scrutinize for the learning first. And the other thing to think about when you're building a curriculum with worksheets and handouts is that not all students need the same materials. Consider making some handouts and worksheets available to students as resources rather than giving everyone the same stuff. You can show them how to select the materials they need and show them where to store them for future reference. So that was the first reason, that people just don't have materials and they need to replace textbooks or technology with worksheets. Another reason teachers tend to rely heavily on worksheets is for skills practice. Many teachers use worksheets to give students practice in required skills. This seems to be most common in math or in the later grades with things like chemistry equations. While this method obviously gives teachers some of the results they're hoping for, if you take a few things into consideration, you can probably refine the practice. Here are some questions to consider when heading to the copy machine. The first one is, how much practice is really needed? Does every student need the same amount of practice? And can they stop when they've had enough? Another thing to consider is, would other activities be just as beneficial or more beneficial than practice problems? And I'm linking you to two things from Professor Joe Bowler, who is really doing a lot of work on getting teachers to do higher quality math instruction. So one of the articles I'm linking to is where she describes 4 other ways to develop number facts and number sense. And then I'm also linking to a tweet that she and I exchanged where she showed a paper that's folded into 4 sections, and you put a math problem in the center and then have students show you 4 different ways of solving the problem. Activities like these get kids to actually think and talk about the math they're doing rather than just completing problem after problem. So you may consider replacing some of your problems with activities like these. And then the other thing I'm going to say about skills practice with worksheets is, I'm going to say it again, if you are recording a grade on practice work, especially if that grade is based on accuracy, it's not practice. Just keep this in mind when deciding how many problems are really necessary to give students the practice they need. If this is for a grade, then it's actually not practice. The third reason that teachers use a lot of worksheets, or that they say is a reason that they need to, is for the sake of differentiation. Teachers often find that creating leveled packets of work is a simple way to personalize learning for each student. But does this have to mean that each child in your class gets one of 3 large comprehensive packets? Think again about the suggestion I made a little bit earlier, where handouts and worksheets are offered as resources and students decide which ones they need. In episode 30, I interviewed math teacher Natalie McCutcheon about how she runs a self-paced math class in her middle school. Her system is fantastic. Students work through units on their own, and they decide how much practice they need before taking the assessments. So some students do a lot, while others do very little. Now, if you could even move close to that direction, rather than just giving all students a ton of work to do because it's different levels, then you will actually be doing higher quality differentiation. So a fourth reason why teachers tend to rely heavily on worksheets is for grade level alignment. In some schools, teachers are required to teach the same thing as their grade level counterparts on the same day and document the whole process in detailed standards aligned lesson plans. When I talk to teachers about why they're burned out, it's policies like these that they often cite as completely draining them. And this type of requirement also causes many of them to resort to teaching entirely with packets. They find a workbook that says it's standards aligned, then everyone uses the same set of pages every week. Done. This makes for incredibly dry, uninspired learning. And unfortunately, I don't have a good solution for it. My best advice is to share this post with your administrators so they can see the impact that this type of policy is having. I would also urge you to question the integrity of the standards label that is on these worksheets. Is the packet or the worksheet really getting kids to do what the standard says, or is it sort of a lighter version of that, like in the example I gave earlier of labeling the verb forms instead of actually using them in their writing? These packets may act as a stopgap for now to meet this difficult requirement, but if your team has been using the same set for several years, now may be a good time to look more closely at them to see even if some pages could be removed and replaced with other activities. The fifth reason that teachers rely on worksheets is for sub-plans. When we have substitute teachers, sometimes packets seem to be our only option. This is another tricky one. If you really have no other option, at least do everything you can to make sure the worksheets lean more toward the PowerSheet end of the continuum. Another option that can work if you know you're going to be out ahead of time is to train a few students to lead the class in an actual lesson, and then let the sub know that the plan is to let these students teach. Now, I can hear some people laughing. This would obviously require a lot of work up front, and you need to have built a classroom culture where students want to behave while you're gone. But I do think that it can be done. The sixth reason that teachers rely on worksheets is for crowd control. In overcrowded classrooms, it seems impossible to do anything hands-on, any kind of group work, anything interactive. Worksheets, at least, keep everyone in their seat and under control. This, again, is more of a systemic issue that could only truly be solved at the policy level. With that said, I still don't believe worksheets are the only option. While it's true you may not be able to do big, sweeping, hands-on stuff, you can do paired work, you can set up tasks around the room in stations, or you could even split the class in half so that only some are doing the active work while others are seated and calm and then switch. More than anything, really, all I can tell you is to just try not to throw in the towel on this. Even if you can switch up 10% of what you're doing over the course of the year so that you've got less busy work at the seats and a little bit more activity going on, it's a start. The seventh reason that teachers rely on worksheets is for bell ringers and morning work. In order to maximize instructional time, we're advised to make sure students have meaningful work to do from the moment they walk into class, hence the birth of the bell ringer. I have definitely seen the value of a good bell ringer, and I saw a huge difference between the 1 year that I didn't use these and all the other years that I did. But if that work isn't really meaningful or isn't helping most kids learn, then it is a waste of instructional time. So here are some other options. One, quite simply, is to have students do self-selected reading for the first 10 minutes of class. Never a waste. Another option is to give students a great anticipatory set to introduce the day's learning. There are so many options for these, and I'm going to link you to two. One is an article by Christina DeCarbo-Wagners, and she talks about how she switched from doing practice work for her morning work to showing students a thought-provoking image and having them write up sort of a reflection on what they thought that image was. It's a good post. And then another in episode 53, I interviewed two math teachers, Matt Baudry and John Stevens, and they wrote a book called The Classroom Chef, and we talked all about that book. They use cooking as an analogy for the entire classroom experience. And one of the things that they're really good at are what they call appetizers, which are basically, hooks at the beginning of class. So they give a ton of really cool ideas in that book and in the interview. And another option for a bell ringer or for morning work is something called morning choice. And I learned about this from a blog post by Adam DeVico, and I linked to that on the blog. He is a principal, and he's talking about how one of his teachers made this shift from morning work to morning choice, where they get a variety of choices instead of just all doing the same thing. This teacher allowed students to choose between, and this is what she called the choices: artistic expression, problem solving, computer time, leadership, collaboration, and game time. And they're all sort of explained in more depth in the post. I loved this idea. It's one of those things that takes time. You can't just start immediately on the very first day. You have to sort of teach students what the norms are and what the procedures are. And the big key for this teacher that made it successful is that she rolled it out slowly, and she gave students experience with each station first. She assigned them to stations before actually shifting to where they could choose what they wanted to do for their morning work. And so it looks like a really, really nice option. Okay, so those are some other things that you can do instead of just, the typical bell ringers in morning work. Another reason some teachers give for using a lot of busy sheets is that some kids like worksheets. And this is true. For some students, busy sheets give them a nice, calm, quiet activity to pass the time. But this alone is no reason to make them the standard fare for your classroom for all of your students. But what you can do is make busy sheets an option for free time. as something to do to decompress, or even as one of several options students might choose to practice a set of skills or test themselves on some aspect of your content, not for a grade, but for practice. So, if you've got students who like to color and they finish all of their stuff and they've got 5 minutes at the end of class, they want to sit quietly with some colored pencils, great, make those available. Just don't call it your content. And you can also have practice sheets. If you've got a student who's working on a certain type of math skill and they want to get a little extra practice to see if they've got it, they can elect to do that instead of it being the work that all students do. And the very last reason that I've heard from a lot of teachers who lean on worksheets for a lot of their instruction is the fine motor argument, that students need fine motor practice. And you see this mostly in early childhood. These educators sometimes will rely on worksheets for handwriting practice or to have students color, cut, and glue items to develop their fine motor skills. So although worksheets do offer a way to give this fine motor practice, there are a lot of other ways to do it. And so what I'm linking you to are 2 separate posts, one that offers 40 ideas and one that offers 30 ideas for other kinds of fine motor practice that they can do in school. And that variety is really key to just making school a more joyful place for students instead of just having them sitting with worksheets. And then one other question to ask about this idea of using them for fine motor practice is, once a child has gotten to a certain level of fine motor development, do they still need to keep practicing it in the same amount as other students? And that, because I don't have an early childhood background, I don't actually know the answer. It's possible that a lot of kids are allowed to move on. But I suspect that there are some teachers who will just keep having everybody do the same types of activities over and over again, even though you've got some kids who are obviously just fine with their fine motor development, and they could be using that time to do something else. So those are lots and lots of suggestions. On the website, I've also just created a big infographic of just lots of different things you can do instead of packets. So if you're going to be cutting down or eliminating your use of packets and worksheets, this is going to free up more instructional time, which is a good thing. And so come on over to the post and take a look at this list of different ideas. They're obviously going to fit for different activities better, but it's just a good kind of brainstorm list of ideas. So I just want to leave you with this final challenge to do a worksheet audit. Everyone teaches differently, and as we have established, all worksheets are not created equal. There is no single prescription for what kind or how many worksheets you should be using with your students. Only you and your students can know that for sure. So my challenge to you is simple. From now on, every time you're about to use a worksheet, ask yourself if it's contributing to student learning or if it's actually just keeping them busy. If it's the latter, start replacing your worksheets with better, richer alternatives. Your students will learn better, school will be more fun, and you'll waste a whole lot less time in line at the copy machine. For links to all the resources mentioned in this episode, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 92. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day. This podcast is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. To learn more, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.